Chapter 8. A Healing. A lady, one of our neighbors, told of an event which occurred in 1935. A relative of hers, her sister-in-law, was dying from a tumor on her head. Only one daughter, Nunzia, was left at home because her father and two brothers had been called up for the conquest of Ethiopia. This family possessed a great many hectares of land. The girl turned to Aunt Rosaria to have a talk with Luisa, with a secret hope of a cure in her heart. Aunt Rosaria, moved by the girl's entreaty, promised to help her and spoke of the event to Luisa, who said, "She must not come to see me, because I am not capable of working miracles. But if she does not come, I will pray the Lord for her all the same. In the meantime, give her this message. At Santa Maria Greca, they have a quarantor. She should go there and pray to the Lord, and she will be able to ask him for all the graces she needs. But tell her to do so with deep faith." The girl was disappointed to receive this message. She would have liked to meet Luisa and discuss her problems with her. Aunt Rosaria noticed how the girl felt and said to her, "Do as Luisa said." Indeed, Aunt Rosaria knew Luisa well and could interpret her words. The girl went to church, knelt before the Holy Sacrament, and unburdened herself of all her sorrow. About 2 hours later, on returning home, she noticed a deep silence. A relative of hers, whom she had left to care for her mother in her absence, had departed. Entering the bedroom, Nunzia was devastated by the scene. Her mother was lying in a pool of blood. The bed was soaked in it. At this sight, the poor girl uttered a cry of pain, believing her mother to be dead, but something incredible occurred. She awoke as though from a long coma, asking her daughter with surprise why she had cried out in that way. The tumor had liquefied, draining from her swollen head, through her nose, and spreading all over the bed. She was completely cured. A few days later, Nunzia went with her mother to thank Luisa, but the servant of God did not receive them, because she made it clear that she knew nothing about this grace, nor would she have anything to do with it, saying, "Let them go and thank the Lord for the grace received." The Horse's Whim. In 1970, when I was a curate of the Immacolata parish in Barletta, and the local and regional assistant of the Franciscan youth, while I was taking off my sacred vestments after the 10 o'clock celebration of Holy Mass for the young people on Sunday morning, Mrs. Livia D'Aduzio came into the sacristy. Having heard me speak of Luisa Piccarreta in the homily, she told me she was from Corato and had known Luisa in her youth. I paid great attention to the words of Mrs. D'Aduzio, a Franciscan tertiary who took part regularly in parish activities. This lady was the wife of Savino D'Aduzio, a great benefactor of the friary. It was he who funded the artwork done by Father Ugolino da Balluno to decorate the sanctuary. The D'Aduzio family was very rich and owned a lot of land, but the couple Savino and Lavia had no children. I made an appointment with Mrs. D'Aduzio to record her memories of the servant of God. The next day, at 9 o'clock in the morning, I went to her house, located in a road crossing Via Milano, about 500 meters from the parish church. Mrs. D'Aduzio was well informed of Luisa's life and the phenomena concerning her, about some of which I knew nothing at all. She also told me that she had known Aunt Rosaria and Angelina, Luisa's sister, very well, and had also been at the funeral of the servant of God. Among the many things she enthusiastically recounted, she drew my attention to the phenomenon of the horses, unknown to me. I had her repeat the episode several times and took notes. Here is her testimony. In 1915, I was 10 years old and was with my mother in Santa Maria Greca, where the Holy 40 Hours was being solemnly celebrated. While we were listening to the priest's Eucharistic reflection, we heard a noise outside the church. A man's voice crying, "Gee up, gee up," and the cracking of a whip. Overcome by curiosity, all the children immediately rushed out of the church, followed by the priest and some of the faithful. We saw 2 horses kneeling before the church, harnessed to a closed carriage. The priest immediately understood what was going on, and kneeling, said, "It is Luisa the saint, who is adoring Jesus in the Eucharist." We all knelt down in deep silence, and, I'm not sure how much later it was, the priest opened the door of the carriage. He said a few words to Luisa, then the horses suddenly stood up and trotted off. We all went back into the church and continued to listen to the priest's meditation. After the story, I asked her several questions. "Are you sure that it really was Luisa in that carriage? I know that Luisa never went out." "That's true," she replied. "Her outings were very rare and at night, and only for reasons of hygiene, so that the straw or wool mattress could be cleansed of parasites, especially fleas and lice, common in farming environment." "How can you say that the horses were kneeling to give Luisa the opportunity to adore Jesus in the Eucharist?" I can only say that everyone believed it was a miracle, and the phenomena was a topic of discussion in all Corato. Of course, there were many who didn't believe it, especially the priest who lectured people, saying that Luisa had nothing to do with it, that it was only a whim of the horses, which had happened by chance to stop in front of the church of Santa Maria Greca. They denied that Luisa had been in the carriage. I asked her a last question. "Are you sure that Luisa was in that carriage?" "Absolutely certain," she answered. "I saw Luisa in the carriage when the priest opened the door and spoke to her. I think that the priest was Father Gennaro di Gennaro." "But wasn't he Luisa's confessor, delegated by the bishop?" I continued. "I don't know about that. I can only say that he was a very holy priest, esteemed by all Corato, who had received a grace from Luisa." The conversation with Mrs. D'Aduzio ended with these words. The upper room of Via Panseri. In 1943-44, my family had a bakery with a wood-burning oven, which was very profitable. Next door to the bakery lived Aunt Nunzia, my mother's sister, who, having been left a widow, had married a man, also widowed, whom she called Z. Sissel, a farmer by trade. Opposite Aunt Nunzia's house lived a very poor family with numerous children. Their heritage consisted of a single cow. They lived by selling the milk and by other expedients, such as petty theft and the like. The mother was called Maria, and was known to all as Marietta the Cow Woman. However, there was something special about this family. The inhabitants of the street would gather at its home around a great fire and a blind old man was invited who would sing of the typical episodes of the town's events, old and new, accompanying his songs with his mandolin. They enchanted everyone. What a pity that we did not have the means of recording him then, so as to have been able to collect all his ballads. He sang, recounting on request events that had really happened. He was a rhapsodist, a miniature Homer. His lovely tales ranged from the religious to the tragic, from the exemplary to the heroic, such as the story of the mother who had herself killed to save her son when he was pursued by the Garbaldini. I, a boy of 9 or 10, used to like visiting this upper room in Aunt Nunzia's company. I remember that I sat on the knee of Marietta's eldest son, who was called Pasquale. One bitterly cold evening, the blind man sang of the deeds of Luisa the Saint. He described her as a great heroine, suspended between heaven and earth, between angels and saints. 2 episodes impressed me in particular. Jesus, who spoke while he carried the cross upon his shoulders, and the episode of Tor Desperata, where the baby Jesus played and ran in the cornfields, holding little Luisa by the hand. When I spoke of these things at home, my mother forbade me to visit that family, and even scolded Aunt Nunzia. When Aunt Rosaria heard things of this kind about Luisa, she would be deeply distressed and would beg my father to summon the blind old singer so that he might remove Luisa the Saint from his repertoire. To my aunt, all this was profanation. When I grew up, I thought again and again of the blind old man. If only we had been able to record all his ballads about Luisa, perhaps we would have an entire poem on the servant of God. One thing is certain, Luisa had made such a deep impression on Corato as to be considered a heroine of holiness. The horse cured. In Corato, especially on winter evenings, several families might meet around the hearth in one of the houses, and it was lovely to listen to the old people's stories. Among the ancient and recent events involving the townspeople that were told, there were many whose subject was Luisa. It was precisely at one of these popular gatherings that the episode of the horse was heard. A hoary old man who was almost 100 recounted the episode of the horse in vivid words with evocative gestures, using the Corato dialect, which was still pure at that time. Here is his tale. When I was little, I lived in Via del Merge, close to the house of Luisa the Saint. I was a young man, and the vernacular Carasudu, when a misfortune befell her poor family. One morning, their horse was found dying on the floor of its stall. The veterinarian was called, and advised Luisa's father to sell the animal to the butcher immediately to make something out of it, since the poor beast had not long to live. This news caused the whole Piccarreta family great anxiety, because the horse was a necessary means for their survival. The Piccarreta family was not rich. Its only income was the fruit of the father's work. Nicola, on hearing this news, said with deep sorrow, "And now how are we going to survive? Who will feed these 5 women?" referring to the daughters. The whole family and the neighborhood were in the stable, except for Luisa, who was 4 years old at the time and very fond of the horse. Luisa's mother did not let her enter the stable for fear she would be upset. The entire family lived in an apartment in the building belonging to the landowner who employed her father and for whom he worked on the farm of Torre Desperata. But the little girl, in the local dialect, Menen, made such a fuss that she was allowed into the stable. I personally witnessed this scene. Luisa approached the horse, stroked its head, spoke its name, and said, "Don't die, because I love you." Whereupon the horse stood up. The vet noted that the horse's fever had disappeared, and that the horse had recovered and was as fit as a fiddle. Her mother Rosa took her daughter in her arms, said, "My darling daughter," and took her away. We were all overwhelmed by this event, and for some time in the neighborhood of the Via del Merge there was nothing but talk of the healing of the horse. One old woman said, "God has laid his hand upon that little girl, and all Corato will be spellbound by the things that will happen." So ended the tale of the old man who was almost 100 years old.